Welcome, everybody, to Practical Ideas for Growth. I'm Sarah Johnson Dobek. I'm happy to be back and joined today by one of my favorites, Adam Klein, who is now what's your official title, Adam? Chief Growth Officer for
Yeah,
Bennett Thrasher?
yep,
Probably should have double checked my notes on that.
that's okay.
Well, welcome. I'm excited to have you here and talking specifically about this topic that we're going to chat about today, which is the integration of marketing and business development and how to do that successfully to drive growth for a firm. You've been in a BD role for a very long time and working cross-functionally with marketing and operations teams. And we were just discussing that this is not something that we talk about as frequently as we should. We just sort of assume it's all going to work together. So I'm really excited to have you here and to sort of dig into this.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So marketing and business development, these two roles are very much distinctly different roles, but we kind of call them growth, right? And they have different needs and responsibilities. What do you see as the difference between those two things?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question to start with. And I think maybe the first point is you're right, is that they're both oriented at growth, right? That is the core central goal of both functions, if you would. And then some people run in, well, where's sales and all this, right? If you actually do have, what some people refer to as, a sales function within your firm, right? And again, the common goal singularly of all these is growth, right? It's how do we grow and drive further success in the firm? And I think when you look at it, you can look at sort of how has marketing and business development maybe traditionally been characterized and differentiated, and how are those done today, which is a little bit different. But I think really at its core, and you look at it, I mean, marketing is effectively, at least in my vantage point, is building the brand, driving the identity of the organization, right? In many cases, identifying market opportunity, seeding the market for opportunity, right? And business development is typically then looked at as, the group, the individual or the team or the function that's out there actually taking that, brand identity, taking that seeded, effort in the market and turning it into actual, growth opportunity, turning it into selling opportunity. And I think, you look at the trend right now, it is while they are distinct, really, again, they're working towards that common growth goal, and really, the more distinctive they work or separate from one another, I'd argue it's probably not as effective.
Well, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. I do think marketing and sales roles have changed quite a bit. And so much of that we definitely saw through COVID, it was a massive shift for accounting firms in their investment into relying on digital and really looking at marketing as more than, yes, they own the brand. Oftentimes they're described, to disagree with this, on the people that make things look pretty.
That's right.
And while they do that, while they do make us look really good, it's about so much more than that. I like to think of it as the top of the funnel, right?
Exactly.
Marketing is driving that brand awareness. It's going to feed the top of that funnel. And business developers, nurturers, and salespeople are going to pull that through the funnel. But it takes both groups to be able to do that effectively as we look at it.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right too. I mean, to me, I agree with you, Sarah. I don't think there was a better example than what you saw through the pandemic, and particularly if you look from the CPA firm standpoint, look at PPP and ERC, right? And firms started operating in a way that very few really had, and certainly not to that extent where firms saw, well, wait, we can go out into our market, or heck, other markets for that matter, right? A national market, and we could deliver thought leadership and content and advice and perspective in a way they never did before, right? Almost much more true outbound marketing, if you would. And what does that do to then generate interest coming in? And they saw that then there was an opportunity to turn that into business, right? And then that's where your business development function really can drive that. But I think it really, in my mind, it really turned the profession on its head in a big way and very quickly.
It did. This was a trend that was moving that direction, but yes, COVID advanced that so significantly. And we saw that through the growth survey that we do and the responses to how budgets were being allocated, the investments, the software that firms are now utilizing. And it's not something that's going the other direction. Like once the investment's made and we're down that path, we're there. It doesn't mean that the traditional stuff doesn't go away. But to me, if you're a firm that doesn't have that as part of one of the channels of growth for your firm, like we're missing an opportunity. Right?
Right.
Major opportunity to compete effectively.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, you and I were together at an AIM presentation, maybe almost a month ago now. And you were talking about buyer personas with one of my colleagues and a couple other people and the AIM group, Becca Johns. And specifically, we were talking about marketing and sales, how disconnected they are, and how you've overcome this. And I thought it was such an important, valid point. I'd love for you and for our audience of listeners to hear a little bit more about how do you try to get that connected? Because there is a major disconnect and it can significantly impact the success of any initiative when marketing and sales are sort of like in two different mindsets.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny because prior to that presentation, as we were preparing for it, I was talking with a colleague of mine, a very successful business development professional at a large firm who also has a successful, who leads business development, who also has a successful marketing organization, but they operate very distinctively. And they operate in some cases, I think, he would share in some cases, maybe even a little adversarially. They're not operating on the same page. And I'd have to say, this wasn't I'm not the creative behind this idea, but at my former firm, what we saw was, again, that common goal was growth. So the concept that, when I was at my former firm was, let's bring these two departments in under a single roof. And really that is a growth team, right? And that's a growth team that consists of business development functions and marketing functions and other related functions, but really operating as one group. And so when I got here to Bennett Thrasher, shortly after I was here, that's one of the things we did as well. And I think it's more than just sort of the name. It's more than just saying, oh, look, kumbaya, we're this cohesive team. It's that we really do look at everything in cohesion and we look at strategy, again, from that growth, viewpoint, right? And how is everything we're doing aligned? And I think in the case of what we talked about with the buyer personas and someone, in fact, in the audience brought up a good example. He said, well, a marketing department could develop, all the buyer personas they want in a sense. And if you have business developers or rainmakers at the partner level who sort of aren't a part of that process or don't buy into that line of thinking, sort of what's the value there, right? So I think the alignment is incredibly important. And I think one of the ways, at least at my firm, that we found to do that is to bring those two sort of oftentimes distinct departments in together.
Yeah, and I love that they do need to be aligned together. I fully agree with that. I don't think that they should be separate tracks operationally, right? And reporting to, different people. But the other thing that I thought was really good part of this conversation, and we talk about this all the time, is I think the piece of integration, right, that becomes so valuable is the people that are doing the messaging, which are often the marketers and creating the communications, visually, written, video, whatever format it takes, they need to understand the things that are resonating on the sales side. And I think that's where the salespeople become so incredibly valuable because they're just not going to be in that seat. And they're marketers because they're not usually sales-minded people. So there's some things that they have to learn and vice versa. And that's usually where I see the biggest disconnect. I don't know what you're seeing and how you're trying to tackle that over at Bennett Thrasher to try to get that bridged a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on there, right? When those two efforts or the viewpoint or the mindset is not aligned, they just don't have the same, they're not seeing the world the same way in a sense, right? And again, it goes back to this colleague of mine who I was talking with said, if my marketing team develops buyer personas that don't match the reality of what I see, on the front line, if you would, or out in the market, then there's that disconnect, right? There's that discord there. That's where I think the most when you see success with, be it a buyer persona process, or really I'd argue any, again, growth initiative or marketing initiative or BD initiative, it's when there is that alignment, and they're, the folks developing are looking at it from both angles, from, what makes sense from sort of the marketing, theory, if you would, or implementation, but what also makes sense to the people on the ground, out doing the interaction and doing the work. So I think that's, again, an example, you're right, where that alignment's key.
Yeah, and I for some of our audience, right, the foundation of buyer personas is to help with all of the messaging, from everything from marketing assets all the way through some of the sales assets, and it's sort of twofold. And for our listeners that they're like, oh, we don't have any salespeople, like that's not something we ventured into. We're not quite big enough. Your salespeople are your partners, right? They're the people out doing the work. So whether you call it a partner or a salesperson, or whatever you term it in your organization, I couldn't agree more that we have to get that. The other thing that I'm curious about, right, and we've talked a little bit about this too, is that professionals in both roles need to be clear on the firm's overall plan so that they know where they can add value. How are you identifying on your team, or how are you approaching this? I know you're still relatively new at Bennett Thrasher and still building out your team, but how are you identifying who has the right skills for the seats that you have, and distinguishing between kind of that marketing and sales function in the firm?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think, in my situation, sort of 7.5, 8 months into a new role here, I think it starts with a few things. I think, it really does start with, again, growth, be it business development leadership, marketing leadership, but growth leadership, really, having a seat at the table, from a firm leadership standpoint, right? And being a part of driving what that firm's vision and future and strategy is. And then, to me, and I think something that's been very effective here, and I think from what I hear from our team is refreshing, is, I almost bring total transparency down to my team, as appropriate, to share with them, look, guys, this is where the firm is going. These are the goals. These are the objectives ahead. So I challenge our team to, sort of use that lens under everything they do, right? And I've said, I want you to think about the things we're working on and the things we're tackling. Is it supporting? Is it aligning? Sorry, I keep using that term, aligning. Is it aligning with the firm's growth strategy, with the firm's future? And I think we have to look at it in that, again, from that perspective. And then I think, to the second part of your question is, do we have the right people to do, to accomplish the stuff we need to in order to meet the firm's goals, and to be aligned with that growth strategy. And in many cases, I think traditionally firms have not. And I think we've seen that change in the last few years. I mean, look at the growth we've seen, particularly, I think, in marketing departments, with people coming in from a digital standpoint, people coming in from a brand standpoint, people coming in from a design standpoint. I think we've seen so much change, particularly in those marketing teams, to align with where the firms are going.
Absolutely. Firms are making huge investments on the marketing side. Our survey showed this year that a good percentage of the firms that were responding were planning to make at least one hire or augment their staff in some sort of way. And I just thought that was really interesting, that there not only were budgets increasing and being reallocated heavily towards digital, but they were also investing into their folks.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll go back real quick to the point you made before, right, about the marketing traditionally being looked at as the ones who make things pretty, right? And unfairly, we know that's not the case, but it is sometimes the stereotype. And I think there's real power. I saw it at my former firm. I see it here in just rebranding, if you would, our team as the growth team, right? Because I think it gives us a position to show how we're positively impacting the success of the firm, from that growth lens, rather than just, well, we're the marketing team that sort of does these things, or even we're the BD team that goes out and tries to just drive new business, right? It's what are we doing to contribute to the firm's success? And I think the optics matter.
Well, and I'd be remiss to say, what does growth look like for firms today? Because most of our firms are looking at us and going, we don't really need that much more business. We're fine on the business front, but where I think marketers and salespeople are adding value and continue to add value is people, right? So how are we developing our people? How are we getting the firm's brand out there to help support some of those recruiting initiatives? Because without our people, we don't have a product. That is our product at the end of the day in professional services business. So, it's interesting to me. We're seeing firms reallocated. And I remember entering the profession and people being like, don't get involved in HR and recruiting. They'll think you're an administrator. And I don't listen to other people's direction very well. I tend to follow my own gut. So it served me well in my career, and it ended up serving me well. But that's most of the conversations we're having these days. I've had 3 today just on what are we doing to help do recruitment marketing, and how are we supporting what those initiatives are for the firm. And I think there's so much good things that can come out of that collaboration between the operations teams and the recruiters in HR and marketing and sales, if they just spend a little time like talking amongst themselves.
That's right. I heard very recently, I heard one of the thought leaders in our space that you and I both know made a comment to the effect of, all the energy and effort, growth or marketing or BD has typically put in over the last several years to growing the firm's new business and growing the firm's clients really should be realigned to growing the firm's people and growing the firm's brand, right? So that we are bringing new people and new resources into our firms and making us better firms and smarter firms. And I think that's where, to me, again, growth isn't just about new revenue, right? It's a big part of it, but it really is about the overall growth of the firm.
Absolutely. Well, Adam, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to all of our listeners. We would encourage you to think about how you can better align your marketing and sales teams and your operations teams to better support the growth of the firm. You can find this on a replay of our podcasts on Spotify and iTunes.